Hello, world, and welcome to the In My Footsteps podcast. I am Christopher Setterlin, coming to you from the vacation destination known as Cape Cod, Massachusetts, and this is episode 246. Summer is unofficially here, and we've got a perfect companion for any barbecue, any picnic that you've got, and that is a fresh batch of GenX nostalgia. We're going to start it off with a look back at the definitive late-night talk show of the GenX era, and that is the Arsenio Hall Show. We're going to go way back in the day, 40 years ago, to the Monkees reunion tour, the unexpected second life of the 60s rock band. There's going to be a brand new top 5 looking at the most underrated moments of the 1980s. Some very influential moments that might have flown under the radar a little bit. And we're going to have a brand new This Week in History and Time capsule looking back at the life and legacy of Bob Dylan as he celebrates his 85th birthday. All of that is coming up right now on episode 246 of the In My Footsteps podcast. So what are we going to talk about this week? How it is unofficially summer. Memorial Day weekend has just passed. The irony being on Cape Cod, we had a record high heat wave last week with temperatures getting up near 90 and the real feel getting over 100. And then Memorial Day weekend comes and it's mostly clouds, a little bit of rain, temperatures hovering in the low 60s at best. There is still a little bit of downtime for probably the next month until it's just nonstop insanity on Cape Cod where you can't make a left turn until after Labor Day. But if you're stuck in traffic, or if you're out at a picnic, a barbecue, out for a walk, out at the beach, thank you so much for tuning in to the show. My attempt at contributing positively to your mental health as we start to wrap up Mental Health Month, which May is. It is going to be a fun show this week, so I'm going to dive right into it quickly. Just a little bit of housekeeping stuff. First and foremost being that I cannot start off this show without thanking my Patreon subscribers. Thank you to Lori, Mary Lou, Ashley, Kevin, Leo, Marguerite, Neglectoid, Crystal, Matt, Dr. Shrimp Porto Chico. Thank you all so much for being my biggest backers, the people that literally put their money where their mouth is to support me, my content, my never-ending quest to be a full-time self-sustaining content creator. That quest gets 2 more big bumps up this week. First of all, as June starts, I'm going to be launching the fundraiser for The Cabin, my feature-length film debut I will be producing. Once that is up, the link to donate or to share the fundraiser will be in the podcast notes right at the top until we get ready to film, so probably until early August. The other big news is that I finished the treatment for and shared the pitch for a TV show that I'm hoping, you never know if there'll be interest in, a sitcom kind of like The Office, but focused on working in restaurants in the 1990s. I have dozens and dozens of stories that are true that I thought I should try to at least make this into a show and see if there's interest. Because you don't see many things like that on TV. Those of you that are longtime podcast listeners, you know my restaurant storytime segments. Those are all true stories, so tell me that wouldn't make a good TV show. We will also be kicking off the month of June on Patreon with a brand new members-only podcast, a new hidden track podcast, and then a new remastered Without a Map live stream. So get over there on Patreon and join for $5 a month. You still can vote on episode 250, Listener's Choice. All of the polls are up on Patreon for anyone who's a member, free or paying. Yes, they will be going up on social media probably in the next week to 10 days. But I'm trying to push people over to Patreon to join. So go over there and vote, or you can wait for it to be on social media. But let's get started with episode 246. Looking back at what was my favorite late night talk show of my generation, my childhood, the one that I always watched if I could. So let's get started by talking about the beloved and influential Arsenio Hall Show. When you talk about the history of late night television, it depends on when you grew up as far as who you look at as the big time names. People today would say Jimmy Fallon, Jimmy Kimmel, Stephen Colbert. Go back a couple of decades, you could say David Letterman, Jay Leno, Conan O'Brien. For me, when I was born, when I grew up, I was lucky enough that I kind of straddled the line between two different generations of late-night talk shows. I was old enough that I got to watch the Johnny Carson version of The Tonight Show the last few years that it was on. I would also dip in and out of watching David Letterman. But for me, and probably a lot of you that are out there that are my age, the show that spoke to me the most, being a Gen Xer, was the Arsenio Hall Show. Oh, I'm sorry, I've got to do it right for all of you that know. It is Arsenio Hall. Oh, man. Gotta open that up and clear out the old pipes. It's like dying after that. I even cut that short. Yes, that was how the show would always start when he would get introduced. Just that super long O. I'm sorry for any of you that were listening in the car and were like, when is he gonna shut up? That was why I held it short. I could probably have just stretched that out, but you would have just skipped to the end of the podcast. All right, where was I? So in the late 80s, early 90s, there was no late night host that represented the youth culture, energy, hip-hop, changing American culture more than Arsenio Hall. For me, growing up on Cape Cod, we had the Arsenio Hall on WFXT before it was a Fox affiliate. And it was more than a TV show. It was a cultural movement giving mainstream television a younger, more diverse audience and introduced a style that permanently changed late-night entertainment. Before he became a late-night icon, Arsenio Hall had spent years working in the comedy circuit. He was born in Cleveland, Ohio. He developed his act during the stand-up comedy boom of the late 70s and early 80s. Many of us out there knew who Arsenio Hall was before he became a late-night talk show host, thanks to his role as Semi in Eddie Murphy's classic Coming to America from 1988. That was a big part of it. Arsenio Hall, he was so good in that movie that I was like, oh, he's got a talk show? Well, I'm definitely going to watch that. It was after he was in Coming to America that the television industry was searching for a younger, more contemporary alternative to the traditional late-night television. Johnny Carson was getting old. David Letterman, he was younger and a little more hip, but he kind of fit that next generation of Johnny Carson. You needed someone totally different. And Arsenio Hall represented youth, style, energy, and deeply connected to the black culture and the music scene that younger viewers loved. On January 3rd, 1989, the Arsenio Hall Show debuted. It was taped at Stage 29 at Paramount Studios in Los Angeles. That first night, he had Brooke Shields, Leslie Nielsen, and Luther Vandross as his guests. From the very beginning, his show felt radically different from the other late-night shows. I literally just did the introduction there. Can you imagine on The Tonight Show they never would yell Johnny Carson's name like that? It was really loud, edgy, and audience-driven. Just remember, if you watch the show, Arsenio would come out, he would pump his fists, and all the audience would bark. That chant was associated with the dog pound that he had there, but still, everyone would cheer for Carson and Letterman. Nobody would bark for them. I don't know if they'd want that. Arsenio's fashion sense also stood out, where he would wear flashy suits, sunglasses, sometimes leather jackets, streetwear-inspired looks. He looked more like someone that you'd want to see and hang out with. The only thing that seemed to be consistent with Arsenio's show as compared to other late-night shows was him having guests. The audience was different, the clothing was different, the pacing of the show was different, where Arsenio's interviews felt looser, more conversational, and connected to contemporary youth culture. You could sometimes see the difference with celebrities who seemed uncomfortable or rehearsed on other talk shows feeling more relaxed with Arsenio. Honestly, what truly made the Arsenio Hall Show revolutionary was its embrace of black culture and hip-hop at a time when mainstream television often marginalized both. Arsenio would have rappers, R&B artists, and black entertainers who were frequently ignored by other late-night programs. In a time where hip-hop still struggled for mainstream legitimacy, Arsenio had Tupac, he had Public Enemy, Snoop Dogg, he had MC Hammer on there. For me being 11, 12 years old and watching and getting introduced to these different hip-hop and R&B artists, it was a perfect storm for me because one of my closest friends at the time, and still to this day, one of my favorite people in the world, Hassan, getting to see some of the artists that he liked as a young black man, it gave me things that I could talk to him about, ask him questions about. The Arsenio Hall Show, it helped to redefine what was considered cool. The fact that I watched it and I could say to people, oh, did you see Public Enemy on Arsenio last night? It made you feel like you were a part of something. When you are talking about quintessential moments and guests from the Arsenio Hall Show, probably the most iconic moment of the show, and maybe one of the most iconic in the history of television, was when then Arkansas Governor Bill Clinton appeared in 1992 playing the saxophone while wearing sunglasses. Many political analysts believe that this appearance helped to humanize Clinton, because when you look at the history of this country, typically the president is an old white man who doesn't have a lot in common with younger people. I was way too young to vote when Clinton was on Arsenio, but he seemed more like a cool uncle than like a grandfather that yells at you for putting a drink down on the table without a coaster. For me, though, and this has to go to my age and my interests, I think my favorite guest ever on Arsenio was when he had Jason Voorhees on. He literally had Jason came out in the full suit with the hockey mask. He never spoke. He just sat there and stared at Arsenio. I remember Arsenio having different wrestlers on, which was pretty cool. I mean, he had Hulk Hogan on when he lied about not taking steroids. But then he had Macho Man Randy Savage on there, and it might have been one of the first times I ever heard him speak in his regular voice and not that gravelly, "Yeah, I'm gonna tell you something, brother." He just talked normal. I remember a time when Mike Tyson and Muhammad Ali met up, and this was when Ali, I mean, he was suffering from Parkinson's, but he still could talk. It was a little quieter. Arsenio asking Ali who would win between him and Tyson, and Ali said Tyson would, and Tyson said Ali would. It ended up being like a who's who as far as stars of the era. During its 5-year run from 1989 to 1994, you had people like Prince, Michael Jackson, Whitney Houston, Madonna, Tom Cruise, Robin Williams, Magic Johnson. There seemed to be nobody that if Arsenio wanted them on the show that they wouldn't go on there. The rise of Arsenio Hall's show coincided with this massive change in late-night television. In 1992, Johnny Carson retired. I said I checked out his show. I would watch some of the Tonight shows. But if I had to choose between the Tonight Show with Johnny Carson or Arsenio Hall, I would choose Arsenio every time. What ended up happening, though, was even though Carson retired, the competition intensified with the rise of Jay Leno on NBC, Letterman moving to CBS, eventually the rise of Conan O'Brien. A big issue with Arsenio Hall's show was that because it was syndicated, it wasn't tied to a single network, so it became vulnerable to time slot changes. This became a problem because many stations moved the show to later hours to accommodate Letterman and other programming, and this damaged the ratings. By the end of 1993 into early 1994, the ratings for Arsenio Hall's show began to decline. The final ever show in the original run of Arsenio Hall was May 27th, 1994. So 32 years ago to the day that this podcast is going live. After 5 years and 1,406 episodes, Arsenio went out with a bang on May 27th, 1994, with a major hip-hop freestyle, including hip-hop legends like KRS-One, Naughty by Nature, A Tribe Called Quest, and this year Rock and Roll Hall of Fame inductees, the Wu-Tang Clan. God, me just saying that Wu-Tang's in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame makes me feel so old. Even though the show only lasted 5 seasons, it was highly influential. One of the most influential shows ever, really, on television. Basically for who it introduced, people that would get seen that wouldn't normally get seen, crossing racial and cultural barriers. I don't think I appreciated it as much at the time. I was 16 years old when Arsenio went off the air. I just knew he had a lot of younger, cooler people on the show that I wanted to watch and then talk to my friends about at school. In 2013, the Arsenio Hall Show returned. There was a lot of excitement and nostalgia. During the first few weeks, he had major guests like Prince, Kanye West, Kendrick Lamar, Eddie Murphy. But by this time, late-night TV was dominated by established personalities across multiple networks. You had streaming options, YouTube, social media, and thus the ratings weren't there and the reboot was canceled after 1 season. You can look back now over 30 years and see where historians credit Arsenio Hall with a lot of important and influential things, like bringing hip-hop into mainstream late-night television, expanding representation in entertainment, changing the style and energy of talk shows, making late night feel younger and culturally connected. Even decades later, people still remember the dog pound, the celebrity interviews, the introduction with that long O that I gave you. I won't do it again. I can only speak for me, but I think for a lot of Gen X viewers and people that grew up at the time, the Arsenio Hall Show was not just a television program. It was the sound and spirit of the early 90s itself. This week in history, we are going back 85 years to May 24th, 1941, and the birth of one of the most legendary and most important voices in the history of music, Bob Dylan. Oh, I can hear my old buddy Dan's voice coming in my ear saying, finally you put respect on Bob Dylan's name. Few artists in modern history have reshaped pop culture as profoundly as Bob Dylan. He transformed songwriting from simple entertainment into a form of poetry, social commentary, and personal expression. He became the voice of protest movements, alienated audiences by refusing to stay predictable, reinvented himself countless times, and ultimately became the first songwriter ever awarded with the Nobel Prize in Literature. Bob Dylan was born Robert Allen Zimmerman on May 24, 1941, in Duluth, Minnesota. As a teenager, Dylan became obsessed with early rock and roll, admiring performers like Elvis, Little Richard, and Hank Williams. He played in several high school bands, developing a reputation for intensity and ambition. Even then, classmates remembered him as someone who seemed determined to escape small-town life. While attending the University of Minnesota in 1959, Dylan became immersed in folk music. In Minneapolis's Dinkytown neighborhood, he discovered traditional American folk songs, blues records, beat poetry, and the music of Woody Guthrie. It was around this time that Zimmerman adopted the name Bob Dylan, likely inspired partly by poet Dylan Thomas, although Dylan himself later gave conflicting explanations. In 1961, Dylan moved to New York City and gravitated towards the folk clubs of Greenwich Village. He performed in small cafes and coffee houses, quickly earning attention for his raspy voice, original lyrics, and magnetic stage presence. He also visited Woody Guthrie, who was hospitalized with Huntington's disease in New Jersey. In 1962, Dylan released his debut album, which was self-titled, through Columbia Records. It was a modest seller, But his breakthrough came next year in 1963 with the freewheelin' Bob Dylan. Songs like Blowin' in the Wind and A Hard Rain's Gonna Fall turned him into a leading voice of the folk revival. Blowin' in the Wind became an anthem of the civil rights era after being covered by Peter, Paul, and Mary. This is around the time that Dylan found himself being labeled as the voice of a generation, which was a title he deeply disliked and spent most of his career resisting. In the early 60s, Dylan became closely associated with political activism with songs like The Times They Are A-Changin', Masters of War, and Only a Pawn in Their Game. Yet Dylan quickly became uncomfortable with being seen solely as a political songwriter. One of the defining moments in rock history occurred at the Newport Folk Festival in 1965, where Dylan appeared with an electric guitar and backing rock band, shocking folk purists who viewed electric instruments as commercial and inauthentic. Some of the audience members booed loudly. It was soon after that Dylan released a series of groundbreaking albums, including Bringing It All Back Home, Highway 61 Revisited, and Blonde on Blonde. Songs like a Rolling Stone revolutionized popular music. At over 6 minutes long, it broke radio conventions and proved audiences would embrace ambitious songwriting. I'm definitely speedrunning Bob Dylan's career here for this segment. I'm trying to give you the hits and the Cliff's Notes for anyone that's not familiar with him. In the 1970s, Dylan demonstrated his refusal to remain artistically static, including his 1975 album Blood on the Tracks, which is often considered his emotional masterpiece. It included songs like Tangled Up in Blue, Simple Twist of Fate, and Shelter from the Storm. My first memories of Bob Dylan came in the mid-1980s when he was part of the supergroup The Traveling Wilburys alongside George Harrison, Roy Orbison, Jeff Lynne, and Tom Petty. He has seen peaks and valleys in his popularity, but his influence over music has never wavered. In 2016, Dylan was the first songwriter ever awarded with the Nobel Prize in Literature, which that's part of his enduring power. It lies in how difficult he is to define as a literary figure. His work blends folk traditions, beat poetry, blues, surrealism, biblical imagery, Americana, some stream of consciousness writing. He's acted in films such as Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid, Masked and Anonymous. He's become a respected painter and visual artist. It is almost impossible to overstate Bob Dylan's impact on popular music. Artists from nearly every genre cite him as an influence, including the Beatles, Bruce Springsteen. He is, without a doubt, one of the greatest songwriters in history, a literary icon, a revolutionary figure in rock music, a chronicler of American life, and a symbol of artistic freedom. And this week in history, Bob Dylan celebrates his 85th birthday. And now coming in like a hurricane is a brand new time capsule. I threw a dart at the wall of history and chose May 24th, 1974, 52 years ago this week. What was going on in the world of pop culture back then? Well, let's find out. The number one song was The Streak by Ray Stevens. This is a country song, but it's also a novelty song talking about the popularity of streaking at the time, which is running around naked, usually in public places. This song spent 3 weeks at number one. This was the lead single from Ray Stevens' album Boogity Boogity. Does anyone out there remember the 1986 family horror movie called Mr. Boogity? I wonder if that was influenced by this album. I would say you could go watch that movie, but you need a subscription to Disney Plus, and I wouldn't recommend any of you spend money to watch that garbage movie. Anyway, to sum it up, Ray Stevens has actually won a pair of Grammy Awards in his lifetime, but it was not for The Streak. The number one movie was Thunderbolt and Lightfoot, and you could get into the theater with a ticket costing $1.87. This is an action comedy film, not a film about horse racing. I thought these were both like horse names. It starred Clint Eastwood, Jeff Bridges, Gary Busey. It's about a drifter who, while stealing a car, crosses paths with a legendary thief during his own escape. It is 89% fresh on Rotten Tomatoes and made $25 million at the box office on a budget of around $4 million. The number one TV show was Kojak. This is the famous drama starring Telly Savalas as Lieutenant Theo Kojak. I just remember Telly Savalas for that shiny shaved head and his voice, "Who loves you, baby?" The show was on for 5 seasons and 118 total episodes between 1973 and 1978. The character of Kojak is routinely on countdown lists of the top characters ever in TV history. And if you were around back then, May 24th, 1974, you were heading into Memorial Day weekend. Memorial Day in 1974 was on Monday, May 27th. You've got to go get some shopping done before the traffic comes out. Well, you're in luck because there's a lot of good stuff on sale at Bradley's. It's bike jamboree time, 10% off all bicycles. Portable AM/FM transistor radio, $14.99, perfect for the beach, it says. You could get a pair of clogs for women or teens for $7.99. For those of you that don't know what clogs are, they're kind of like sandals or flip-flops, except with huge heels. There's even they call it a one-man dinghy for $5.99. But then in the illustration, it's a woman in it, and the dinghy is basically an inflatable raft. There's a ton more stuff available at Bradley's. It does make me wish they were still around. But that wraps up another time capsule. That wraps up This Week in History. But now it's time for a new top 5, and we're going to look at some of the most underrated moments of the 1980s. So let's get to it. When looking back at the 1980s, or any decade for that matter, there are definitely moments that stand out as the most important or impactful of the decade. In the 80s, you look at things like the Space Shuttle Challenger explosion, the fall of the Berlin Wall. For me, for this list, I was looking at the moments that were almost as important but kind of flew under the radar, especially when looking back now, 30, 40 years later. This segment was a lot of research and a lot of discretion on my part as far as what I thought were underrated moments. As with most of these top 5s, they are in no particular order, and I've got some honorable mentions to get us started. The first honorable mention is the creation of the modern FICO credit score in 1989. I said underrated, I didn't say good. Having to rely so heavily on credit sucks, but the creation of this score basically determines whether you can get loans for houses, sometimes cars. It's even at this day and age in the mid-2020s where some people say it's better to carry some debt for your credit score than it is to have no debt at all. Another honorable mention is Walmart opening its 1,000th store in 1988. As of today, there's roughly 4,600 Walmarts in the United States, but nearly 40 years ago, they were just one in the crowd along with Target, Kmart, Sears. Opening their 1,000th store kind of put everyone else on alert. Kmart at that time had about 2,000 stores, and they didn't notice Walmart coming up behind them until it was too late. Another honorable mention is Hulk Hogan joining the World Wrestling Federation in 1983. Again, I say underrated. The whole thing with WWE and sports entertainment and that multi-billion-dollar industry they have, it wouldn't be anywhere near what it is now if Hulk Hogan hadn't joined and become so popular, and it led to the first WrestleMania, which led to bigger and bigger shows, more money. Hogan jumping from the AWA to the WWF in December 1983 was the catalyst for all the stuff you see today. And the final honorable mention is the release of the original Air Jordan sneakers in 1984. There have been many other brands, there have been many better shoes, but there have been none that have made the impact that the original Air Jordans did. Sneaker culture started with the Air Jordans. Just to put it in perspective, if you happen to have a pair of the original Air Jordans, you could fetch anywhere from $3,500 to $25,000 on average on auction for them. I could have any pair of sneakers I've ever had, put them up for auction, I'd get like 3 cents for them. I would get money though, because someone will buy anything. So those are the honorable mentions for underrated moments of the 1980s. Now let's get into the actual top 5, starting with number 1, the creation of the domain name system in 1983. This was basically the jumping off point for the internet as we would become familiar with. Before the domain name system, every computer on the network relied on a single text file, hosts.txt, which was used to map computer names' IP addresses. The DNS was created by Paul Monkee-Patris. It allowed other organizations like universities to manage their own domains. It created human-readable web addresses, and it laid the groundwork for the global growth of the internet. So underrated, but hugely important to everything that goes on today with the internet. Number 2 is the release of the Famicom and the Nintendo Entertainment System in 1983 and 85, respectively. So yes, the Famicom is the Japanese version of the Nintendo. This one, it may not be as underrated, but basically when the Famicom came out in 1983, there was the huge video game crash that had gone on that nearly killed the whole video game industry. Then when the NES came out in America in 1985, that's what pulled the American video game industry out of that crash. It's impossible to say if there wouldn't have been another video game console that came out within that time period or a few years later that revolutionized the video game industry. But it's hard to overstate just how important the NES was for saving video games. Without it, there would probably be no video game industry. It would have been this little niche chapter in the history of pop culture, like the stupid NFTs are. It may look primitive to some of the younger generation today who are used to video games that look like reality, but there's no denying that without the NES, the video game industry either wouldn't be around or would be far, far less profitable than it is today. Number 3 is the World Wide Web proposal in 1989. This basically picks up where that creation of the domain name system left off. This proposal was submitted in March 1989 by British computer scientist Tim Berners-Lee. The idea of the World Wide Web was originally for scientists to track and share research. The majority of the World Wide Web today is far less important than that, but everything that's going on in the technological revolution of the last 30 years, it starts there. That 1989 proposal included concepts about decentralization, hypertext, and independence when it comes to merging the evolving technologies. By the end of 1990, World Wide Web had been coined, and by Christmas 1990, Berners-Lee had successfully built the first web server, first web browser, and the foundational technologies of the web, including HTTP and HTML. Number 4 is the missing kids being placed on milk cartons in 1984. 6-year-old Eton Potts from Manhattan, New York, was the first child put on a milk carton. The reason this is underrated, at least in my opinion, is that it symbolizes the beginning of, I guess you'd say, more control, more rules, more parental involvement in their child's lives. It wasn't immediate, but you can kind of draw a line in the sand where once kids started being on milk cartons, parents started to be less oblivious to what their kids were doing. Those of you that are older Gen Xers or younger boomers, 60s and 70s, you probably were able to go wherever you wanted, do whatever you want from a very young age. Even me, as a, younger Gen Xer, I can remember being 10, 11 years old and just walking on my own to the corner store. Now, granted, I would usually be with friends, and my mother wasn't one to just tell me to go and don't come back. I'm sure if I had walked to the corner store and wasn't back in an hour and a half, she'd come looking for me. But this whole thing with the milk carton kids, it started putting the fear, and I guess rightfully so, into parents. Like, okay, we can't just let our kids go and do whatever. And it's gotten to a point now in the 2020s where I rarely see kids walking anywhere, riding their bikes anywhere. And I'm not saying it's bad. The kids are safer, but they also won't grow up with that sense of adventure and freedom like my generation and the ones that were just behind me. And finally, number 5 on the list of underrated moments from the 1980s is the release of the Aerosmith and Run DMC collaboration on Walk This Way in 1986. This, I feel like, is the moment that hip-hop broke through to the greater audience. Basically, Aerosmith opened the door, allowing people to say, oh, okay, I guess we can listen to hip-hop. As soon as I first saw this video, I immediately went looking for other Run DMC music. In all honesty, I mean, granted, when the song came out, I was probably 8, 9 years old, but I couldn't tell you one hip-hop rap song from before this moment. I could give you a laundry list from after because it opened my eyes and ears to a totally new sound. Interestingly, the song wasn't expected to be released as a single or even played on most radio stations. Not only was it played, it was Run DMC's biggest hit, finishing at number 4 on the Hot 100. Not only did this song make hip-hop more accessible to more people, it also signified a comeback for Aerosmith, who had significantly fallen off in the early 1980s. Their whole second act begins here. And just think of all the incredible songs they released in the late 80s, early 90s. But there you have it, my top 5 underrated moments of the 1980s. What would your list look like? I tried to kind of cover everything. Technology, music, society, sports. I'm sure I missed some, but also in the future I'll be doing top 5s like this for the 60s, 70s, 90s, 2000s. So we'll definitely be revisiting this again in the future. In the summer of 1986, one of the most unlikely comeback stories in pop culture history exploded across America. The Monkees, who were once dismissed by critics as a manufactured television band from the 1960s, suddenly became one of the hottest touring acts in the country again. What began as a nostalgic television marathon on MTV quickly turned into a full-scale Monkee-Mania for a new generation. What we're going to do here is we're going to look back at that amazing second act, the comeback of the Monkees, along with a little bit of how they got formed. I'll probably do a segment in a future podcast about the Monkees show. And in this, I will not be talking about the new Monkees show, except to make fun of it. Obviously, we have to talk about how the Monkees started, because if you make a comeback, there had to be a period of popularity at some point. The Monkees were created in 1965 for a TV series inspired by the success and the humor of the Beatles and their films like A Hard Day's Night. There was a massive casting search with 4 performers selected. First was Davy Jones, and then after came Mickey Dolenz, Michael Nesmith, and Peter Tork. They were initially conceived as actors portraying a fictional rock band, but the group rapidly evolved into a genuine musical phenomenon. Their TV series premiered on NBC in 1966, It became a sensation of blending surreal comedy, fast-paced editing, and catchy pop music. They had enormous hits like Last Train to Clarksville, I'm a Believer, Pleasant Valley Sunday, A Little Bit Me, A Little Bit You, Daydream Believer. At their peak, the Monkees rivaled the Beatles in album sales and teen popularity. The band sold millions of records in just a few years, but controversy followed them from the start, with critics mocking them, saying they were an artificial band assembled by television producers. Although studio musicians played on many of the early recordings, the band members fought for creative control and eventually began writing songs and playing instruments on later albums. The cancellation of the television show started a quick downfall. There was also changing musical tastes. There were internal disagreements with the band. Basically, by 1970, the Monkees were done and the members moved on to separate careers. For years, the Monkees were viewed as kind of a quirky relic of the 1960s. There was even one point, I believe it was 1978 or it was the late 70s, that Mickey Dolenz and Davy Jones played at a local nightclub on Cape Cod, the Compass Lounge, which granted it was one of the biggest nightclubs ever on Cape Cod as far as popularity. But to go from sold out arena shows with tens of thousands to playing a relatively lesser known club on Cape Cod was definitely a step down. So the Monkees were basically gone, faded into obscurity. But then, something strange happened. MTV had been rising in popularity from its debut in August 1981. It was easily a powerhouse in cable television. It was one of the most powerful forces in music and youth culture. So if they put their time and effort behind something, it usually worked out. That's what happened on February 23rd, 1986. MTV aired a marathon of the Monkees TV show called Pleasant Valley Sunday.
Daydream believer, Mary, Mary, here we come.
The Monkees, coming soon on MTV.
The network expected, mild nostalgia and, mild interest, but instead the response was overwhelming. Teenagers who had grown up entirely in the MTV era suddenly discovered the Monkees, their humor, the editing, the infectious songs. What's wild is that even though the show was from 20 years before, the style of the show seemed to fit the MTV generation. The marathon was a rating success, and MTV quickly added the Monkees show to the regular rotation, and it also started airing on Nickelodeon. To no surprise, this is where my first experience with the Monkees came in, 1986 on MTV. I became a huge fan of their music and loved just the weirdness of their show. There would usually be a main storyline, but there would just be these quick, it was almost like Monty Python before it was out, quick cuts, sometimes like non sequiturs that didn't connect. And then there would be almost a full-length music video in the show. It became part of my regular viewing when I was 8-9 years old. And it happened all around the country. Almost overnight, Monkees albums returned to the charts. Rhino Records released a compilation, Then and Now, The Best of the Monkees. This included the single That Was Then, This Is Now, which became a surprise hit in 1986. It got into the top 20. With that success, promoters realized that the Monkees could go on tour again and probably do well. The original idea for a reunion of the Monkees was relatively modest, with nobody expecting a cultural explosion. Earlier in 1986, Davy Jones and Peter Tork had performed together in Australia, kind of testing the waters for a reunion. And soon afterward, plans were made for a full North American tour. Only it wasn't the full Monkees. Michael Nesmith declined to fully participate, as he had spent years building credibility as a respected songwriter, producer, and pioneer of MTV. He didn't create MTV, but he was one of the pioneers that had that vision, even creating a program called Pop Clips in 1979 that aired on Nickelodeon that was kind of a precursor to MTV's music video format. So the irony is that Nesmith, his old band, got popular again through his, vision of MTV, and then he didn't want to be a part of that success because he worried the reunion might damage the reputation he had developed. That didn't stop them. The Monkees officially launched their 20th anniversary tour, and what had been planned as a nostalgia package suddenly became one of the biggest concert attractions of the summer. In the crowds at these shows, you had the original 1960s fans, teens that discovered the group through MTV, families attending together, and just curious music fans that got caught up in this cultural wave. It is hard to imagine something similar happening. I've been racking my brain trying to think of another example of a group or a musical artist that was popular, fell off big time, and then came back and was arguably more popular, at least for a brief period. One that popped into my head was Johnny Cash with his American recordings in the 1990s. But I don't know if Johnny Cash ever fell off to the degree that he was playing nightclubs on Cape Cod. No offense to my home. Maybe you can think of one, but the Monkees seem to be kind of standing on their own. These concerts in 1986, they were a giant celebration of pop nostalgia, comedy, there were sing-alongs, the Monkees leaned into their humor, self-awareness, openly joking about their manufactured origins while embracing the excitement of this comeback. It really was lightning in a bottle. As you would expect, the concerts leaned heavily into the classic hits, I'm a Believer, Last Train to Clarksville, Pleasant Valley Sunday, Steppin' Stone, Listen to the Band. One of the most legendary moments of the entire reunion occurred when Michael Nesmith actually made a surprise appearance during a Los Angeles performance at the Greek Theater. The audience went nuts when Nesmith walked on stage. For many, seeing all four Monkees together again for the first time in years was emotional and historic. Despite that, he never committed fully to the tour, but it did hint that his relationship with his Monkees legacy was softening. The Monkees' 1986 comeback had a big ripple effect throughout entertainment. Not only did it resurrect their careers, it helped to invent the modern reunion tour. You see them all the time. The biggest one most recently was Oasis, where the Gallagher brothers just basically wanted to kill each other for 15 years, but then finally the money outweighed the bloodlust. And then before that, I can remember when Guns N' Roses, the original lineup, got back together. This was probably 2016 or 17. That was major. The Monkees reunion proved that older acts could return successfully by appealing to, longtime fans and younger audiences. The reunion also validated nostalgia as big business. I say repeatedly on this podcast that nostalgia is a powerful drug. I have so much fun researching and recording this show, just burying myself in the past for a little while each week. The Monkees reunion showed networks and record companies that old content could become valuable again through cable and reruns. The biggest part of this is how it was totally by accident. MTV, I don't think they expected this to be a major deal, and what they ended up doing was resurrecting the Monkees, basically from the grave. This reunion in 1986, it was kind of the peak of the popularity of the Monkees. They would stick together in various incarnations. They would tour again a little bit here and there. They would do albums together. But there was always tension between the band members, involving money, creative direction, ownership of the Monkees name, the participation in the new recordings. Fun fact, that was then, this is now, that comeback song. Only Mickey Dolenz and Peter Tork recorded on it, even though it was listed as The Monkees. That would be like the duet that Paul McCartney and Ringo Starr just released, being released as The Beatles. If MTV hadn't chosen to share the Monkees show on their network, most people would likely still see the Monkees show and the band as this quirky footnote of the 60s. But after their comeback and their reunion tour, critics and audiences had to acknowledge the strength of the band's music, their influence on music television, their role in pop culture history, and even the musicianship and songwriting talents in the group. What started as a nostalgic MTV marathon unexpectedly reignited global interest in a band that many had forgotten. Today, Mickey Dolenz is the only member of the Monkees still alive. He's 81 years old. He's still doing tours. He still looks pretty good. But now, 40 years since that big second act of the Monkees, that reunion is remembered not just as a successful concert tour, but a landmark moment that changed the music industry's understanding of nostalgia, television reruns, and legacy artists forever. But until next week, that is going to wrap up episode 246 of the In My Footsteps podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you for making it to the end. I hope you have enjoyed your weekly dose of GenX nostalgia. Come on back next week, because I just keep on going. It's going to be episode 247. We're going to kick off the month of June with a look back at the beloved Richard Scarry children's books. We're going to do a nice overview of the history of daytime talk shows. We're going to look at the highest rated movies of the 1990s, at least according to IMDb. And we'll celebrate the life and legacy of Clint Eastwood for his 96th birthday. So all of that is coming up next week on episode 247. If you enjoy my work, you can become a subscriber on Patreon for $5 a month. You can buy me a coffee. You can support me by sharing my content. I put it everywhere on social media. Instagram, Threads. I've got a YouTube channel. I am in the process of revamping and revising my Facebook fan page. For years since I started the podcast, I've had a fan page that is just for the podcast. And I realize I'm selling myself short because I've got books and blogs and films that I've acted in, produced, along with the hundreds of YouTube videos. So I am changing that up. So go and become a fan over there. It's going to be loads of just nonstop content. I need a place to share it all. It's like I'll spend all this time creating a YouTube video, a blog, a podcast, and I share it when it's fresh, and then it just goes into the closet. I want to be able to go back and share old archive stuff. Congratulations to my nephew Landon on graduating high school this coming weekend. It hasn't happened yet, so I don't know how much we have embarrassed you, but we're going to try to set a record. And happy birthday this weekend to my oldest niece Kaylee, who is turning 27. I got to embarrass her recently by showing her some old home movies of her when she was little. It's amazing the concept of time, where I can remember the day that Kaylee was born and being there, and it doesn't seem like that long ago, and yet, as of this week, 27 years have passed since then. As far as housekeeping goes, like I said, keep on the lookout for the fundraiser for The Cabin, my feature-length film debut. Share it if you can, donate if you can. I will keep you updated if anything comes from my TV show pitch. And hopefully by the end of the summer, I will have my children's book, at least idea, finalized so I can start sharing it. So much of my life is create, which is another reason why I need to revamp that Facebook page so I can actually celebrate the things I've done instead of finishing it and moving on to the next thing without a breath. Never stop chasing your dreams, though. I can't reiterate that enough. It may take you forever, but the only time you actually fail is when you stop. I have done a lot and accomplished a lot, and I'm very blessed and lucky and grateful, but there is still a lot more that I want to do. So keep chasing those dreams, make the most of the time you have, Take care of your mental health. Make sure I'm hitting all these points I want to say in rapid succession as we get to the end here. I will wrap it up as I always say. Remember, in this life, don't walk in anyone else's footsteps. Create your own path and enjoy every moment you can on this journey we call life, because you never know what tomorrow brings. Thank you all again for tuning in. This has been the In My Footsteps podcast. I am Christopher Setterlin. You already knew that. And I'll talk to you all again soon.